Hi, I'm Doug Reeves. Welcome to our video series on grading, standards, and assessment. I want to tell you that I welcome your comments and questions. You can tweet me at Douglas Reeves. You can email to douglas.reeves@creativeleadership.net. And I'll be happy to engage you personally as well as your entire faculty in conference calls, video conferences, or whatever works for you. In this session, we're going to talk about homework. And I'm indebted to Dr. Terry Hanrahan of Plano School District 88 for providing some really thoughtful questions about this subject. We've all experienced homework ourselves as students, and we've all been experienced teachers at this. The question is, are our homework policies working? So here's the framing question that I want to ask before we begin. If our current policies with respect to homework are really effective, then you ought to be able to tell me that today's student is more compliant in turning in homework at a record rate, doing it on time, doing it well. And if that's the case for you, keep doing what you're doing. But you want to know what I'm hearing from teachers around the world? It's that despite our best efforts, homework is late or oftentimes non-existent. And that ought to tell us that no matter how well-intentioned our homework policies are, they're just not working. So in this video, what I want to do is suggest that we reconsider our homework policies and do things that will work better for you. So first of all, let's address the big question of why homework is important. Well, let's consider using a different term. If we replace the word homework with the word practice, we all know that practice is important. You know, if you're a musician, you know that you can do a lot in the lesson, but if you practice between lessons, you get better. If you're an athlete, you know that before the big game, practice is important. But in both of those cases, the practice has to be, in John Hattie's terms, deliberative practice. The kind of practice that includes both what we know and more challenging and difficult things. When you think about it, if we think of a perfect homework or practice paper as getting the odd-numbered problems 1 through 30 all right, we've wasted our time and the time of our students, because that is only what they already know. Watch a great musical practice. Watch a great athletic practice. And you'll see not only students doing the things that they already know, but attempting more and more difficult things. And in the process of doing that, they will fail, they will make errors, they'll get immediate feedback both from their teachers and their colleagues, and then do better. That means that in a really good musical or athletic practice, you'll see lots and lots of mistakes. And then finally, over the course of time, they get better. And think about this, as 50% of the time they got things wrong and then got better. What would happen if we graded it like we really grade real homework? If they only got 50% of the problems right, they'd get an F. But done well, 50% of the problems getting wrong, and then getting feedback, and then getting better, actually results in better student performance. So I'm not dismissing homework. I'm just saying let's reconsider it as practice. And really good practice requires immediate feedback, requires collaborative work, and requires error and then getting better. That's what good practice is. My principal, Mr. Robinson, used to tell me that the word homework may or may not have anything to do with the word home. And I've seen more and more schools do homework and practice at school where they can get immediate feedback and get better. So how could we use homework to improve student learning? One of the best things that we can do is have students compare their homework to what an ideal assignment looks like. If they're working in isolation, they really don't know what the model is. Now, I'm not saying that they should copy from something, but if you want them to, for example, explain their work, we should have a model of what explaining work is in a math class. If we want students to create a graph in a math or a social studies class, we ought to have a model for what a real great graph looks like, with the axes all labeled, an interpretation of what the graph means, maybe even predictions about where the graph might lead with future data. In other words, when students have models to work from, then they can improve their performance and change from what their original draft was to something better and better and better. How do you create a culture where kids understand the need for practice and give it their best effort? I've struggled with that because I've certainly seen kids who regard homework as simply irrelevant. Put yourself in the mind of a student who's got 30 problems to do. He does the first 5 and says, well, I've shown that I can do it, so that's it. What happens when they do 5 problems out of 30? Once again, a failed homework assignment. So if we really want kids to get better and better, again, let's take our cues from great musical and athletic practices. After a student, for example, let's use boys and girls basketball, shoots 5 consecutive layups, we don't have to practice layups anymore. We'll move farther and farther from the basket. We'll maybe practice with the defense person trying to obscure our shots. Maybe we'll practice different feet moves and different arm moves to get better and better. That will include some failure, but we're not just practicing the same thing over and over again. Our musicians who have mastered the C major scale don't spend an hour doing the C major scale. They do things more and more difficult with feedback until they get better and better. Now, what's a practical way to do this with homework or practice? What I like to use is a menu. I want students, for example, to do 10 problems, but I'll have several problems in column A, more in column B, more in column C. And all I say is, students, I want you to do 10 homework problems. But you choose. You choose whether they come from column A alone, or a mix of A and B, or a mix of A, B, and C. All I want is the 10 problems, but you choose. The next day when I see those problems, I can tell immediately if the entire class is focused only on column A, brother, I've got work to do because they haven't attempted the more difficult problems. Conversely, if I've got lots of students in B and C, it tells me that I need to proceed at a fast pace because they've already got what I wanted them to learn. And more likely what I've got is a mixed class, where some students are focused only on the easier problems in A, others are at C. That's a cue for me to engage in differentiation and not have the whole class learning the same thing. Now, it's a little more work to add all those problems, but I think it gives you better feedback and allows you to improve your teaching immediately. And remember, that homework may or may not be done at home. It may be done in a collaborative group, it may be done at school with your feedback and guided practice. The next question is, what are some of the typical pitfalls of homework? One of the most common pitfalls that I've seen, observing not only my own children, but also my students, is that homework tends to one of two extremes. It's too easy. They're simply practicing what they already know. And they know that a great homework completion is doing all the problems right. The other extreme are problems that are extraordinarily hard, which leads kids to Google the answers or to give up in frustration. What we want instead is mixed practice, where we've got problems that reflect what they already know, we have things that are a little bit harder, maybe a little bit beyond where they are, and we have problems that are significantly more difficult. And we legitimize students experimenting with all three of those. And what we want to see is their effort on all three. We don't want to see perfect work. Perfect work implies that they're practicing things that are too easy. Now, what are the guidelines for how much homework is given? You've probably read two extremes on this. One extreme is Alfie Kohn, who I think does really interesting and oftentimes funny writing. And Alfie's suggestion is homework is worthless and it ought to be abolished. At the other extreme are people who say, well, you want to have about 10 minutes per grade. So a first grader gets 10 minutes, a third grader gets 30 minutes, a sixth grader gets 60 minutes, and so on. And I want to tell you that minutes alone are not the real focus for what great homework ought to be. Homework, remember, is practice. Think of how John Wooden would script every minute of a basketball practice. I've watched great symphony conductors, and they spend a lot of time practicing the same thing again and again, and then they get progressively more difficult. In fact, they also provide real-time feedback during those practices, so the musicians get better and better and better. What are the key elements of developing a good homework policy? I want to suggest that rather than trying to micromanage what you do, we have some collaboratively established boundaries. And one way to think about boundaries on all kinds of feedback, whether it's homework, grading, or assessments, is the acronym FAST. F-A-S-T for fair, accurate, specific, and timely. And if we set those as boundaries, then we trust you individually as professionals to vary your homework assignments and policies, provided that you can give them feedback that is fair. What do we mean by fair? Students who do similar work get similar grades, and it's not distorted by other outside factors. What do we mean by accurate? That means that we're able to say that the student if we had other teachers evaluated, would give very similar grades to what we do. So that's fair, accurate, specific. When we give feedback, we don't just say right or wrong. Can you imagine a music teacher conducting a chorus with a red pen who simply yells out, "Wrong note," but the kids don't know if it's higher or lower, faster or slower? That's not what music teachers do. They give specific feedback on how to improve. Don't just check these problems right or wrong. Provide specific feedback. And finally, what's the T in the FAST acronym? It's got to be timely. I know so many teachers who ruin their weekends by taking work home, and by the time it's Monday or maybe a week later, it's a geological era for those students. Timely feedback means literally the same day. And if we organize our classrooms well, we can provide feedback no later than 24 hours later, and ideally, immediately. That's what great practice is. And finally, how do you deal with kids who are not completing homework? I can tell you that I know some schools that have basically said, whether or not homework is done, what we really want to evaluate is their final performance. Now, theoretically, does that mean that if a kid who aces the final but doesn't turn homework in can still get an A? The answer is yes, because that suggests that their real evaluation is not based upon compliance with things that didn't matter. It's based upon their performance against an academic standard. So that means the burden is on us to do homework that really matters, homework that is directly related to preparing kids for the final. And I want to suggest that homework that's really worth doing will have kids engaged in it, whether or not it counts. I know what you're thinking. If it doesn't count, they'll never do it. So that's true. That's true if it doesn't count. But the real way to make homework count isn't with this daily set of zeros and D's and C's and B's and F's. The way to make it count is to have it relevant to what the final performance is. And I acknowledge some kids will do it and some kids won't, but that's what you've got right now. If we work harder to make homework not a compliance drill, but something relevant to the final performance, you'll have more and more students engaged. And that is particularly true if you do the practice during the school day. So, I know that we want kids to be responsible. I know that we want them to respect you, and we want them to complete the assignments that we give them. But the real issue is not whether they comply, but whether it leads to better performance. So to sum it all up, homework is important, but it doesn't necessarily have to be done at home. Great homework is practice, and take our cues from the most effective practices in your own school. Students don't get extra points in a basketball game because of how they practice during the week. They only get evaluated on how they perform during the game. Musical students don't get a pass on their recital based upon how well they practiced. They're evaluated in the recital. I want to suggest that you apply the same things to your academic classes. Remember that I welcome your questions and challenges and discussions. You can tweet at Douglas Reeves. You can email me at douglas.reeves@creativeleadership.net. And I'll be happy to engage with personal conversations as well as video and telephone conversations with your entire faculty. Thanks for listening.